Welcome to Networking RX, a podcast devoted to helping business professionals like you enhance your networking skills in order to become more proficient giving and receiving quality business referrals and improving the overall quality of your life and the lives of those around you. The Networking RX podcast is a production of AmSpirit Business Connections, an organization whose mission is to empower business success through networking.
Imagine this, you're at work. Could be you got a corporate job, or maybe you're an entrepreneur or a solopreneur, and wherever you work, and you're presenting an idea that you've really thought about a lot, and you've spent hours kind of honing your message. So you make your pitch, and you expect everybody to be like, yeah, wow, great, but instead you're met with maybe silence, confusion, or maybe even disagreement, or somebody is totally off in left field with respect to what you're driving at. You're talking about A and they want to talk about B. And so you're kind of wondering, how could they have not seen what I'm talking about? It's almost as if they're looking at a completely different picture, or you were speaking a totally different language and they heard something completely different. And you're totally befuddled. It's like, well, how did we get off on this tangent? I'm chasing cats here. I'm herding cats. That, my friends, is the egocentric mind at work. So what is egocentrism? It's a psychological concept where individuals, and we're all individuals, rely on our own perspective and have difficulty recognizing that others might see things different than we do. It happens all the time. And that's what I want to explore today, is just touch on this concept of egocentrism and just the implications for it, how it might impact social interactions, certainly in business, certainly in your personal life, and then maybe touch on some ways that you might overcome it. Ways I might overcome it, because I run into the same thing. I have that narrative I just described, describes lots of Zoom calls I'm on, certainly with franchisees, lots of meetings I've had, lots of conversations I've had with my wife and my kids about hey, this is what I want to do this weekend, or this is a project I want to work on, and them having a totally different concept of, well, what the priority of the day is, or how we should tackle a certain job. We just have a different view of the world. Now, early work of egocentrism was done by Jean Piaget. He was a Swiss psychologist, I believe. And a lot of his work was around cognitive behavior in children. And it's not surprising that you're going to see this sort of behavior with respect to kids. If you've ever coached if you've ever had kids, or you've coached a sport where there's young children involved, they kind of have their own mindset as to what they're thinking and what's important, and all sorts of stuff. It can be really frustrating. But as adults, we're kind of expected to kind of outgrow this egocentrism, but it often persists, and it persists because we all have our own views, we all have our own priorities, or what we think are priorities. Well, certainly we all have our own priorities for ourselves, right? I might, around the house, I might have, working on a project of, we're working on the deck, my wife and I, or there's a project there, and my way of thinking might be, you know what, I need it to be strong and sturdy, so I need to do it this way. Whereas my wife's like, well, I want it done this way because that would look best. Yeah, but that's not going to be sturdy. We just have our own little competing, we've got our own little competing worlds here. And she's not necessarily seeing what I'm saying. I'm not necessarily seeing what she's saying. And that can be a subject of conflict. Or it might even be when you're working with clients, just working with clients, and you're looking at their situation. You're delving into their QuickBooks and helping them migrate from QuickBooks Desktop to QuickBooks Online, which I'm going through right now. And they're focused on something, and you're like, well, that doesn't really matter to me. And they're like, well, it should. Why doesn't it matter to you? They're not in your head. They don't see what matters. And so there's lots of everyday examples where we're overestimating how much others share our thoughts or assume that others have the same knowledge or information as we do. And so that can certainly create problems. So can you see the potential problems or impact that this egocentrism may have on relationships with respect to communications, and just how we interact? Now, I say that, but then I think, okay, wait a minute here. I'm talking about egocentrism, and you might have a whole different feel or a whole different way of looking at this whole topic, because I can't assume that you're seeing the world that I'm seeing. I can't assume that you don't have the information I'm talking about. I've got a little bit of research in front of me that I've done on this. But the point is that this notion that we all have things in our minds. Everybody has things in our minds. Anytime you walk into a meeting, you can't assume that that person is going to well, they don't have the information you have. They're not having the day you're having. They don't have the priorities you're having. And so whatever comes out of your mouth may or may not 100% resonate with them. It might be totally off base. It's probably never 100% on target. And I see this as we plan things and do things within AmSpirit Business Connections. I'll have a question for people in the organization or a franchisee. Hey, what do you think about this? And the answer I get back may be totally unrelated. And I'm like, oh my gosh, did they not hear what I said? Am I not communicating effectively? And I don't know that I'm communicating. Obviously, I'm not communicating effectively, or I'm communicating effectively based on what I'm intending to say, but it's not necessarily being picked up by somebody else. So this can create a whole bunch of confusion, a whole bunch of conflict, both in personal settings and professional settings. I've kind of given you examples both ways. And you're probably like, okay, well, how do I solve this? How do I avoid being overconfident with respect to people understanding what I'm all about? And we probably run into it all the time, where somebody comes flying in and says, I was totally clear as to what I wanted. Yes, you were totally clear as to what you wanted, and communicated absolutely what you think needed to be done, but somebody else was thinking off in a different direction. So what's the solution to all this? I don't know that there's a definitive solution. And as I read through this and think about it, I think the most important thing is becoming aware of egocentric tendencies and practicing mindfulness, considering others' perspectives. And what I mean by that is, when you get into conversations with people, or I'll use my own example. If I'm working with my wife on a project at home, realizing that really my main thing is to make sure it's going to be lasting, and I don't have to be fixing it all the time. So I want something sturdy, but understanding that really where she's coming from, her main priorities are how it looks. How it functions. And, with my franchisees, having a particular conversation, what I'm going to try to do is just have a little more grace, not be frustrated when things kind of go awry. And if I can communicate 25, 40%, get through on just a fraction of what I'm intending to get through, and there's a little bit of noise, a little bit of kind of getting off track. Okay, I hear what you're saying. Let's kind of hone ourselves back in. I just need a consensus on this. In other words, giving the situation some grace to understand that they have a different perspective and they have different values and different things that are important to them. And I need to listen to those things. At the same time, I need to get things accomplished for me, but I just need to recognize I'm probably not going to get 100%, and that's okay. I can't control 100%. I'm going to drive myself crazy trying to figure that all out, or trying to get them all on board with what I'm saying. And there's the saying out there, live to fight another day, right? I'm just going to, all right, I've gotten this. I'm going to come back and I'm going to work on this other thing another time. And I see that with respect to working with AmSpirit Business Connection chapters. I'll go into chapters, and franchisees and I have this conversation all the time. You go in and you see 6 things that are wrong. Well, you know what? Don't try and fix 6 things, because that's just going to confuse it. Just fix one thing. One little thing that everybody can kind of get their head around. Okay, we all kind of see it, as opposed to having, a larger picture of things. Because those people sitting in our chapters, and we all have clients, have a different view of what's important. Just have a very different view of it. Again, I'm talking about migrating from QuickBooks Desktop to QuickBooks Online, and we've got 25 years of data we're trying to migrate over, and there's going to be some hiccups. I wish there weren't, but there are hiccups. And so the person who's helping me, he's looking at certain hiccups, and we need to focus on this. And in my mind is well, we don't, because that's outside the audit window. I will never be audited on something 10 years from ago, and as long as I can get a income statement and a balance sheet for the last 3 years that is reasonably equivalent to what I've reported, then I'm okay. I'm okay. We don't need to kind of get off in the weeds. So something to think about here. And maybe you're thinking about something totally different, because you have your own view of the world, and you have your own thoughts with respect to what I'm saying on this podcast, or what you hoped I was saying on this podcast. And that's okay, because you're your own person, and you know what? I appreciate that you're here with me.
Thanks for joining us on the Networking RX podcast. Please put what you've learned into action today, and let us know if you have questions, comments, or ideas for future topics. You can email them to us at podcast@amspirit.com. That's AmSpirit.com. Finally, so you never miss an episode, be sure to subscribe to the Networking RX podcast through iTunes, Overcast, or however you receive your podcasts. Now get out and network with someone.
The Networking RX podcast is the copyright production of AmSpirit Business Connection. All rights reserved.